Hi, I'm DV LeBron, and this is the Ellis Talker Show. Thank you for tuning in. Today, my very special guest is Mr. Gene Moran. He's a former U.S. Navy captain, sir. As a former petty officer, thank you for your service. And he's an author and a national security expert. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. Glad to be here with you.
Thanks for being on, Skipper. I wanted to have you on to talk about some of the national security threats that this country is facing. Since you've been in that industry and you know about what's kind of going on geopolitically, I wanted to have somebody that knows what's going on talk about it. But first, I'd like to have you introduce yourself to my audience.
Well, thanks for the opportunity to be here. I am a retired Navy captain, but I've been in the defense industry for a number of years since my time of service. I left active duty in 2008. That was after 24 years of driving and commanding ships and serving in Washington, D.C. Uh, for a few years, I was a corporate lobbyist in a defense company in Washington. But it was in that role that I recognized how many companies need help in Washington. And I went out on my own just over 10 years ago. And I now advise companies who are selling to the federal government and try to help them work their way through the very complex federal process of buying and selling equipment and services.
Acquisitions is a monster. I've been with the federal government since I left the Navy, and having to deal with acquisitions and just buying through the federal government can be quite a headache. But I wanted to ask you, what do you see as the biggest geopolitical threat that the U.S. is facing right now?
We're being tested around the world, and you can see just many examples of it from China and our stated intent to defend Taiwan. If you look at the Russian incursion into Ukraine and what our response has been, if you look at our posture in the Middle East, specifically right now with the Israeli response to Hamas and what has the U.S. response been, the world is watching how we respond, and there is a growing portion of the population that would prefer to step back from the world stage. And I believe some of those who hold that position have maybe lost sight of how this world order came about and what happened in World War II and the post World War II timeframe that put certain structures and treaties in place that allowed for relative peace, at least from the perspective of the United States. We don't fight wars on our shores, and we want it that way. We want to take the game to an away game all the time. But I think people forget what isolationism can allow for, and that's for other uh, less benevolent actors to fill the vacuum on the world stage. So I see us being tested. So far, we are not responding particularly well, and I think with good reason. There's a portion of America that saw 20 years of war in the Middle East that didn't really get us much, and so they have a limited view or perspective on this bigger picture, and that affects their thinking, and rightfully so.
As OEF veterans, we saw the 20 years of war and everything that happened after September 11th. I came in the Navy in 96 and I left in '06. So I kind of saw the peacetime Iraqi, just make sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing to, September 11th and everything that happened after that. And I know you saw that obviously in your career. Um, are we doing the things militarily or the defense industry that needs to be done, or the military doing what the things that need to be done to face these geopolitical threats like China?
I don't think we're doing all that could be done. We are using China as what's called a pacing threat. And by that, I mean China has declared that by 2027, they wanted to be prepared to go into Taiwan if necessary. And so a pacing threat is one that allows us to rationalize and justify the expenditure of resources and investment in modernization to keep up with that pacing threat. Um, because there are other things happening in the world that we have to also pay attention to, it's easy for us to lose sight of what the reason for that pacing threat is. I know our stated position is that we will defend Taiwan, but I think one looks no further than how we've responded to Ukraine and how we've responded to Israel. I could make the case that maybe we won't defend Taiwan, because I'm not sure that the political will of the people will be there when that time comes. Although the pacing threat is 2027, it could happen sooner. China is learning from us every day when they watch how we respond to these other situations around the world. If you look at the Red Sea, two of the ships I previously commanded are in the Red Sea right now: USS Philippine Sea and USS Laboon, along with the Eisenhower Battle Group, with which I've also served. Those ships are performing incredibly well in a pretty challenging mission that was not entirely expected. And yeah, I think if you go up a couple of levels to the strategic level and ask how well is that mission serving us, I don't think it's serving us well, in that traffic through the Suez Canal has not been restored. It's still down to less than half of what it was, closer to a third of what it was before the uh, hostilities flared up with the Houthis. Uh, so we're winning tactically, but I don't think we're winning strategically over there right now. And these sort of responses around the world are being observed by all of our adversaries. And I'm happy to explore any of them if you'd like.
Yeah, and you know that before I get into that, there was something that you talked about earlier, and you talked about history, and you talked about isolationism coming in. There's a lot of there's a lot of us vets that came back, and we saw. You know, my dad was a Vietnam vet, and he saw the fall of Saigon. I got to see the fall of Afghanistan, and us, the whole generation of veterans that came back kind of broken, or at least with some issues. And I've lost some that couldn't deal with the war afterwards. Um, we saw what happened there, and we wondered what was 20 years about. What was that about? And so there's been some of that that's set in. Um, how do you address that? Being you're a vet, and you're in this, and this is what you do. How do you explain that to you know some of the junior guys that kind of see that and wonder what the heck are we doing?
Well, I think we did do some good along the way, in that we uh, we had good intentions to respond to a terrorist attack. I was in the Joint Staff in the Pentagon at the time of 9/11, in the J3, which is the World Operations Directorate. I saw that response from inside of that part of the national security apparatus. We knew where bin Laden was. A political decision was made to move over to Iraq, and we started to chase two rabbits, so to speak, by going after Afghanistan and Iraq simultaneously. And what happens when you chase two rabbits? You don't catch one, right?
Right.
And we had Iraq contained with a no-fly zone at the time. Saddam Hussein really had no power outside of the country at the time. Bin Laden was within our sights. We had a pretty good geolocation on him, but then we lost track of that, and then we couldn't quite figure out how to fight these wars. And part of the rationale for the wars was to bring democratic ideals into those nations. And we have a tremendous capacity, I say, to overestimate our ability to spread democracy. Not everybody wants it. I will offer that multiple presidential administrations wanted to get out of these wars, but they couldn't figure out how. And I think they were getting counsel from the military that it's just the win is just over the horizon, and the military will never say that they can't do something.
Hmm.
Uh, but multiple administrations wanted to get out. President Biden ultimately came into power, and he is somebody with considerable foreign policy experience. He knew what needed to be done, and I think he used the Nike slogan and said, "We're just going to do it." Unfortunately, I think the execution of that departure was just a shambles, and it's only now, years later, that we're having public hearings where we're learning a little more about the dysfunction between senior DoD and senior Department of State that was entrenched in Afghanistan at the time. And so, in my view, there has not been an adequate accounting of who was responsible for the just terrible decision making that led to that sort of a departure. That does scar the public's perception of what the heck was going on there. But if we don't have an accountability, we don't get past it. So that I think that accountability is still owed to the American people. Um, I'm not saying you have to get a scalp every time, but clearly mistakes were made and decisions were made, and we can't improve upon it if we don't understand what happened.
And nobody was held accountable, and that's a big thing. Nobody, at least from this level, nobody was held to account. Captain, unfortunately, I had a little bit of an incident when I was overseas, and it ended up where I had to stand in front of you, skipper, not you particularly, but in front of my skipper, and I had to be held accountable for my actions. And that happened, and I became a better sailor for it, and moved on. But there was an accountability of my actions in the military, and it didn't seem like any of that was done. And I know that a lot of that is in the political realm, and I want you to kind of speak on how politics, the shifting of politics, how much it's taking over our military decisions. But yeah, that accountability was big.
Well, um, what you're speaking to is unit level good order and discipline. There are rules, there are ways that things have to be done, and when people violate those rules, they have to know that there is some. It may be punishment, it may be an administrative handling of an issue, but it has to be addressed for there to be accountability. And we grow up with that in uniform. Uh, Not too long ago, and this is not a political commentary here, but not too
Hmm.
long ago, we had the attack in Libya when Secretary Clinton was Secretary of State, and frankly, I did not feel like there was good accountability there, and unfortunately, uh, the opposition party in Congress made it a political theater when they had the means to extract accountability, and they just didn't. They they had a colorful hearing that lasted 10 hours or more, which is excruciating for anybody to endure. But that didn't get to accountability, and so when you see it a few times at these at the very senior levels of either very senior military or the political appointees and confirmed appointees, that's problematic, and people see that and it builds on itself. So it does have to be addressed. Uh, to make a comparison to as we're recording this, the tragedy at the Baltimore Bridge just happened within the last days. There will be a National Transportation and Safety Board evaluation of what exactly happened, and that I think we'll find in that case, it wasn't the captain of a ship who made a mistake in driving the ship. It was some other casualty that led to a chain of events. It's often a chain of events that unfolds that allows for things to happen that we would rather not have happened. But if we don't investigate them and understand them, we can't put the corrective measures in place for future events.
How is because there's all these threats, and I kind of want to go into how these threats are evolving, between the way that we're having to deal with the Israel Gaza, we're dealing with China Taiwan, and then Russia and Ukraine, and how those things are coming out. How are you in that industry, how is the political decisions affecting our readiness?
Well, we do have a serious readiness problem just beneath the surface of the big picture here, and that's a documented condition. Uh, if you look in spring of 2023, the General Accountability Office forwarded a report to Congress that documented across defense there are readiness challenges, and readiness is kind of a vague word to some people, but readiness means you can't perform certain missions the way that you should be able to. So it could be personnel, it could be equipment, it could be the ability to replace parts, it could be the ability to accumulate flying hours or steaming hours, but that readiness challenge exists. And in the Navy right now, it's particularly acute with respect to maintenance of ships and submarines. Deferred maintenance over the course of decades has built up to a point that we can't get ships in and out of shipyards on time. And there's this backlog of deferred maintenance. There are cases of submarines being over a year late coming out of a dry docking availability.
Mhm.
That has an effect on the rotational, on the ability to rotate forces to a forward deployed status. So there is a readiness challenge. If you couple that with a shrinking defense industrial base, so the number of companies in the defense industrial base has been declining for a number of years, uh, on the order of 20 to 25% in the last 5 years. During COVID, it was particularly challenging, and this is a documented condition. We are now, we, the nation, Congress, is attempting to uh, do two things at once. We want to stop the flow of goods from China, yet we want to onshore all sorts of capabilities that we're not yet prepared to onshore. We don't have the ability to do everything in America that we once did. Uh, Technology has changed, availability of resources has changed, and the distribution of resources around the world has changed. There are some things called rare earth materials that are used in uh, specialized equipment that are only available in certain parts of the world. And in some cases, China is the only place to get some of these things. And that's because extracting some of those rare earth materials from the earth requires some environmentally unfriendly methods that we won't allow in the US. So Congress wants to legislate what I call an end state. They say we want everything to be bought and made and bought in America, and we're not going to buy from these overseas vendors. Well, we're just not able to do that, and so they have to have all sorts of workarounds to the law that they just passed, and it's a complicated thing. So there, I've talked about readiness. I've talked about the industrial base, and then if you just look at the acquisition structure that's in place and the budget process that funds the acquisition process, it is incredibly cumbersome. It's a multi-year process that was born of the post World War II era. So a budget takes 3 years to develop. By the time it's formulated in the executive branch, moves to the White House, then moves to Congress, then back to the executive branch. That's a complicated process, takes time. And then we have all sorts of rules that are individually quite well intended to try to make sure that we protect taxpayer dollars in how we buy things. But in doing so, we make things 10 times more expensive than they need to be. Uh, and it's just the nature of the beast. The US government is the largest buying customer in the world. There is no other customer like it. Yet, those three things that I just described, readiness, the industrial base, and the acquisition architecture, are they all conspire against best practices.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I've seen there's been these systems on a more local level. Obviously, there's been these platforms that they've come up, computer programs and for purchasing that are very cumbersome. And you got to you're ordering from Granger for those just kind of a simplistic. I'm ordering a widget from Granger, and this widget is not made anywhere but China. Then I'm not supposed to buy it. There's flags. It's a big mess. So um, there is a problem with how we're producing, and I've heard that in the media when it comes to Russia and Ukraine, where um, Putin is not having a problem making bullets, and I guess his industrial base for it is better. I know he's buying a lot from North Korea, but I guess his industrial base is able to support all these bullets and ours are not. Is there
Well,
some truth to
well,
that?
Russia and many other countries have a completely different method of spending the national treasure. So he doesn't have to go through this complicated acquisition process. He can just direct that something's going to happen, and he just needs to find a supplier, and it may be in his country, and it may be elsewhere in the world. And you hit right on it that some of these adversaries and potential adversaries are working in coordination with one another to work against the interests of the United States. And so, if he has a willing seller and he can demonstrate that he has the funding, he can move quickly to fill some of those gaps. Now, that said, uh, the Ukrainians have done an incredible job with very limited resources in inflicting real pain on the Russian military. If you can't just go out and rebuild tanks quickly. Nearly half their navy has been sunk. That's a big deal. And you can't build ships quickly. Ships take
No.
5 to 7 years to build from the time you say go, and that means everybody's ready to go.
Hmm.
So they have inflicted severe pain that at least slows Russia down. But things like ammunition and those sort of expendables of war, uh, to the degree, excuse me, to the degree that they're otherwise available on the international stage, Russia has money and will buy them.
Yeah, they don't have an acquisitions process, not like us.
Yeah.
You are totally right about that. There is something that's more kind of in your wheelhouse a little bit as a skipper. They're supposedly, and this is kind of what I've gathered, a lot of these countries that are adversarial to us, they're coming up with, like Iran, carrier sinkers. I don't know what that looks like, sir. I don't. That's above my pay grade. But that they're coming up with these small type weapons that can take out a platform that we spend billions on. Is that a reality, or is that just them? Is that a hype kind of thing?
Well, there are a couple of ways in which you can get at the U.S. deployed forces. One is by saturating the battle space and getting in closer, and so you're seeing some of that even with just the Houthi rebels, where they can send drones or missiles or a combination thereof in numbers to attempt to saturate our defenses. Uh, I'll just say, without recognizing the classification of the interview, uh, it's a pretty tall order to saturate the Aegis weapon system, and that protects most of the fleet that's operating out there. Uh, However, when you start to talk undersea warfare and the ability to maneuver undersea, that's a different game, and it's a different way. There are different ways for an adversary to get close, and China has been demonstrating that they have an ability to deploy submarines in ways and in numbers that are very difficult to keep up with. Uh, should that sort of combination of things happen, where you have airborne and undersea-borne threats, coupled with potentially hypersonic missiles that come from some other source, that's a lot to defend against. So a carrier is an incredibly formidable platform, uh,
Yes.
but to think that it could not be lost is a mistake. And I think our public revelations of war games about conflict with China in the defense of Taiwan suggest that we would likely lose a carrier and more capital warships in that sort of a scenario. That's not classified. That's public knowledge that's out there now. Uh,
Yes.
so so uh, which adversaries have this capability? Uh, I think we have a pretty good handle on the order of battle of the adversaries. But what we're seeing of late are these third party groups. So Hamas, Houthis, Hezbollah,
Definitely.
funded by Iran with fairly high end capability. It may not be as good as ours, but sometimes the 70% solution delivered at the right time and place can get the job done. Uh,
Yes.
I think there could be much more done to prevent the flow of money that is supporting this sort of uh, development from our adversaries. I know we track uh, drug activity that funds some of those third party organizations. The Coast Guard has a full time presence in the Persian Gulf, for example. That sounds counterintuitive, but they're there to interdict illegal narcotics that are used to fund these sort of activities.
Yeah. Now, there was a time like back in the Reagan administration, 300 ship navy or something like that. I could have the numbers wrong. I was very young.
600. 600.
600,
That was the
600,
that was the stated goal.
600 ship navy and all that. There was a what is it? An emphasis on being robust. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but as you're seeing, because combat tactics, uh, warfare changes, and as you're seeing warfare as it's going in this defense industry and everything, what does our military look like 5, 10 years? Where are we going with this?
Yeah, we're moving fairly quickly to uncrewed systems to complement the major capital ships. And so uncrewed can be, we've seen drones now since early in the Gulf War, armed drones at various sizes. We've been experimenting with unmanned surface vessels or uncrewed surface vessels for a couple of decades now. Those are coming into their own, and we're learning off of Ukraine for sure how they have used them to great advantage. And then we have uncrewed underwater vehicles, UUVs, which can operate autonomously and in some cases operate remotely. There's a difference there. But having those systems able to integrate with our capital warships, it's a challenge to work that communications architecture, but it's happening. Uh, those uncrewed systems are much less expensive, from the cost of the asset for one, but then the cost to man and maintain that asset is much less. So they, in some ways, those systems can become expendable, and although that's not the intent, but they can be lost without the same sort of cost as the loss of a ship.
Right. It like in World War II, I was watching that. I know that it was just a kind of a docu series, but they were talking about the flights into Germany and bombing, and how many of those airmen were lost, how many of those ships were lost, and they called one of them the Bloody Hundred. I don't see us fighting that type of warfare ever again. I think that maybe that we'll send 100 drones, but send 100 planes or 1,000 planes to die. I don't know that we're going to go there. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't
Well,
see it.
it does depend on what your objective is. The Army would tell you that to hold ground, you have to put boots on the ground. And so if your intent is to hold ground somewhere, you first need Marines and then you need an army. You cannot do that kind of thing remotely. Now, but I think we're seeing warfare change before our eyes in terms of what armed rebels are able to do in terms of inflicting damage. I think if you couple that with cyber activity and the ability to take down say financial systems or take down networks, you can inflict considerable damage on a population without ever firing a shot. Take it up into the space domain. Imagine your life today. If you had to live your day today without GPS, what would that be like? Um, I,
Dude.
I think it would be incredibly difficult at this point.
Yeah.
It's hard to go back.
Yeah, well, a lot of people don't know how to function without the technologies that they've gotten used to. I mean, I know you've seen that, and I've seen that. I mean, my kids lose their crap if they don't have internet. So it's real. It's real how it affects us. So I wanted to ask you two more questions before I kind of wrap up, because I could talk to you all night. I'm loving what the knowledge you're sharing with me right now. AI, how is that playing out, and what are your major concerns with it?
I think we have a bit of an irrational fear of it right now. I was invited to a panel that Axios conducted in Washington D.C. a couple of months ago, and it was a sizable roundtable. And I was representing defense business interests just to hear what people were thinking. And there was a mindset that, from a policy perspective, that we should use cybersecurity as a kind of a model of how we approached or how we will approach AI. And I think that's misguided, and said so because with respect to cybersecurity, we have uh, so far expected that corporations and individuals will be responsible for their own cybersecurity. Uh, I think there is a federal aspect to cybersecurity that we should expect to be provided for us. If we want companies to come into the industrial base and be cyber compliant, I think we need to help them because it costs money to become cyber compliant and to make it so that others can't get into your systems. And it costs enough money that companies will not invest sometimes because they don't have the money to make that investment. I think Uncle Sugar, as we'll call him, could help out with that a little bit. Uh, but I think we're already seeing incredible efficiencies that can be introduced from AI, and automations that can take place. I use integrations with many of my platforms right now, emailing, calendaring, uh, tasking, coordination, things that have some repetitive nature to them where patterns can be discerned, can be turned over to an integration so that I don't have to think about it anymore. We're on the very front end of that, and some people have no idea that these capabilities even exist. Now, I'm 61 years old. I get some help with how to make some of these integrations work, and much like our parents and grandparents maybe were a little reluctant to latch onto a cell phone. You know, you just need some help being introduced to the capability. If you look behind us to the younger generations, that grew up with phones in their hands and they don't know any other way but to figure out, intuitive software applications. They're very comfortable with adapting to these new capabilities that AI can help us with. Uh, I don't see machines taking over the world, and I'm not a professional technologist per se, but there are people. I'll use Gary Vaynerchuk as an example. He's a wonderful entrepreneur and social media savant, but he likens AI to the tractor. When the tractor was introduced to farming, it was going to put everybody out of a job. Well, no, it made farming more efficient. AI can make us more efficient. If you think of our ability to control technologies, I think nuclear technology and nuclear weapons is probably the only one that's almost gotten away from us. But every other technology man has been able to master successfully. And I think we will master this as well.
Skipper, out of all the things that you know, and all the things that you've been exposed to, what and I hate to use that line, but what keeps you up at night? What, like, in your brain is always constant about this whole subject?
Well, my family was fortunate enough to just welcome our fifth grandchild to the
Oh,
family
awesome.
last Friday.
God bless.
Uh, I'm seriously concerned for the welfare of our grandchildren who are going to live in a very different world. And we need to make good decisions about rule of law, who's in charge, what's our place in the world. We need to have some understanding of that. And unfortunately, we're living in a time when we self select our news. We, most people, most Americans do not read one book in an entire year. And so we have people who are getting poor information and they're not curious enough to look elsewhere for the information. They get sort of a confirmation bias of what they think they understand and they self select the news and it reinforces it. And that can lead to bad decision making and ineffective decision making. And so, if I flash forward even 10 years, what will the world scenario look like? I don't know, but I know that what was sacrificed before us to get to this place we're at was pretty significant, and nobody's feeling that kind of sacrifice. Nobody, very few people can even relate to it because they haven't had direct exposure to it. I'm not saying you have to have served in the military, but we've lived for decades now with this. Uh, I forget the correct name of the service selection. We could see the need for a draft in the future, and I don't think the country would know how to react to that sort of challenge. It would. It may be that some external force forces us to reconsider what do we think is important, and
Hmm.
I think when that day comes, we'll need to be honest with ourselves, and we'll need to look to our children and grandchildren to uh, understand what their role is, and hope that they're prepared, that we've prepared them to make the best decisions when they are at the controls.
Our history is a tale of those external forces causing us to reevaluate what we were doing. Our very history, as we look back, this beautiful country, wonderful country that I love. When we look back at it, that is the external threats have made us readjust a lot. Um, Captain, I mean, I thank you so much for informing me and my viewers. I mean, there's just so much that you don't know. I mean, I do more reading than you were talking about, allude, but I get it. I was in that circle for a long time where I just watched the media that reinforced what I was doing or what I wanted to think, and that happens. That happens, and it's real easy to do, and I think that's why it happens. And I think that it's purposeful too. Um, you it's I think it's planned sometimes, but that's another show, boss. Thank you so much for coming on. Can you stick around real quick right after the show?
I can. Thanks for having me on. Great to
Th-
be here.
Thank you, Skipper.